In V3, Silver Wolf 999 didn't just change, she got stronger, but in a completely different way. At the same time, Trailblazer was reworked, and that shift is now shaping both Silver Wolf and Evanescia, and not everyone came out winning, especially Evanescia. So let's break down what actually changed from Silver Wolf's new scaling system to Trailblazer's role, and how all of this impacts Evanescia in V3. Starting with Silver Wolf 999, in version 2 her scaling was split into two very clear systems. The first was her Elation scaling, which was directly tied to attack. For every 100 attack above 2000, she gained 5% Elation up to a cap of 120%, meaning her damage output could be increased consistently through raw stat stacking. The second was her Hidden ranking system, which functioned as a damage amplifier tied to her enhanced basic attacks, increasing their output based on the amount accumulated during her rotation. In version 3, both of these systems were reworked rather than simply replaced. Her Elation scaling is no longer based on attack, and instead shifts towards speed, where reaching higher speed thresholds directly increases her Elation output, fundamentally changing how she builds and scales. At the same time, Hidden ranking is replaced by Hidden MMR, which no longer directly amplifies damage in the same way, but instead converts into critical rate at 0.30% per point, and then into critical damage at 0.60% once capped. This turns the system from a straightforward damage multiplier into a layered scaling mechanic that depends on how efficiently she can build and maintain MMR during combat. At the same time, her base stats reflect this shift in design. Her attack drops from 543 to 388, and her defense is slightly reduced, while her speed increases from 99 to 110 and her energy cost goes down from 80 to 60. This clearly moves her away from raw stat scaling and into a faster, more rotation-driven playstyle, where frequency of actions and resource generation matter more than individual hit strength. However, the most important change is not just her speed increase, but the complete replacement of her old scaling system. Hidden MMR is not just a stat you stack passively, it is something that must be built during combat through actions, resource generation, and proper timing. Silver Wolf now depends heavily on generating and maintaining resources like Punchline, Certified Banger, and MMR itself, meaning her performance is no longer isolated to her own stats, but instead depends on how well her team supports her ability to build and sustain this system over time. This turns her into a more technical character where execution and team synergy directly impact her final damage output. Right before moving on, it's also worth mentioning her signature light cone, because it directly reflects this shift in design philosophy. In the previous version, her light cone focused on increasing attack, which matched her old scaling. But in version 3, that design changed alongside her kit. Now it increases speed by 18%, allows her Elation damage to ignore 20% of enemy defense, and helps generate Punchline more consistently after her rotations. So instead of boosting raw stats, it directly supports her new system, reinforcing the idea that Silver Wolf is no longer about stacking attack, but about speed, rotations, and resource generation. Once you understand that shift, Trailblazer's role in version 3 starts to make a lot more sense. In version 2, Trailblazer functioned as a more traditional support. His ultimate, especially with Eidolons, provided a 50% critical damage buff to an ally for 3 turns, making him valuable for characters that relied on direct critical scaling. But in version 3, that interaction is gone. Now, his kit is focused on generating Punchline, Certified Banger, and enabling Elation skill usage more consistently. At Eidolon 6, he provides a 12% speed buff for 3 turns. So instead of being a raw damage buffer, Trailblazer becomes a system enabler, someone who doesn't just increase numbers, but actively helps characters like Silver Wolf reach their full potential. For Silver Wolf, this is extremely important. More speed translates into more turns, more actions, and faster stacking of Hidden MMR, which is now the core of her scaling. This means that even though she lost attack-based scaling, she gained a system that can be accelerated through teammates, and Trailblazer fits perfectly into that role. He doesn't just buff her damage directly anymore, but instead helps her reach her peak performance by enabling faster rotations, smoother resource generation, and more consistent system uptime. Evanescia, however, follows a very different direction. In version 2, her strength came from raw multipliers and immediate damage output, with her skill reaching around 480% on the main target and 240% on adjacent enemies, while her ultimate dealt 240% area damage followed by multiple 160% hits. This allowed her to perform consistently well even without heavy setup. In version 3, these numbers are clearly reduced, with her skill dropping to around 300% and 150%, and her ultimate hits going from 160% to 120% per instance. So right away, compared to version 2, her baseline damage is lower, and she no longer relies on raw numbers alone to carry her performance. To compensate for that, her kit shifts heavily into internal systems. In version 2, her damage was much more front-loaded and less dependent on setup. In version 3, her talent tightly links energy and certified banger into a feedback loop where gaining one generates the other. This creates a more complex system where her performance now depends on maintaining that loop consistently. She also gains more punchline from her skill, but instead of immediate output, her damage now ramps through proper resource management. So instead of being a burst-focused character, she becomes system-driven, where timing, rotations, and consistency matter much more than before. Now here's where the Trailblazer Changes hit Evanescia the hardest. Her entire Elation scaling is tied directly to her critical damage stat, since her talent converts 25% of her critical damage into Elation. This means every point of critical damage increases both her crit output and her Elation damage at the same time. In version 2, Trailblazer's 50% critical damage buff was extremely valuable for her, because it amplified both parts of her kit simultaneously, making him one of her best partners. In version 3, that direct amplification is completely gone. Trailblazer still helps with resource generation and smoother rotations, but he no longer provides the critical damage that directly scaled her output. So while the synergy still exists, it is noticeably weaker than before. And this is where a lot of community sentiment comes in. Before, she could function outside of strict Elation setups and still perform well. Now, she will still work, but whether it feels as strong is a different question entirely. Another major shift is team flexibility. In version 2, Evanescia could work with a wider range of supports, especially those providing energy or general buffs. In version 3, she becomes much more tied to Elation-based teams, since her damage now depends on maintaining certified banger and stable resource loops. Silver Wolf also benefits heavily from Elation teammates, but she retains more flexibility overall. Because her scaling is tied to speed and actions, she can still adapt, for example by running a speed buffer instead of a sustain to accelerate her rotations. Evanescia doesn't have that same freedom. She is stronger inside her ideal setup, but much more restricted outside of it, which is why some players feel like she traded flexibility for consistency within Elation. Now, personally, I think Silver Wolf is ahead in terms of flexibility, team building, and long-term scaling, especially after all these system changes, but when it comes to raw ease of use and consistency, Evanescia might still feel better for most players, and honestly, this lines up with what a lot of players are saying right now. Silver Wolf looks insane on paper, but she really needs the right setup to shine. Evanescia, on the other hand, is just easier to make work, even if she's more restricted. So yeah, higher ceiling or easier gameplay? Which one are you taking? Of course, all of this is still based on beta information, so things can change. But considering we're already in version 3, it's likely that from here on, we'll mostly see fine-tuning rather than major reworks. So yeah, that's pretty much where things stand right now, and honestly, this is probably going to keep evolving as the beta goes on. If this helped you out, drop a like and subscribe, it really helps more than you think. I've got full guides coming for both Silver Wolf and Evanescia, plus more updates on Nova Flare. So yeah, we're just getting started. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.